This is Jennifer Gonzalez, welcoming you to episode 168 of the Cult of Pedagogy podcast. In this episode, we are going to learn how to boost critical thinking in any classroom with a technique called mistake analysis. Picture yourself with your students, reviewing or discussing course content in some way. You ask a closed-ended question, something that has a correct answer, but the student who volunteers gets the answer wrong. What do you do next? Instructionally, this is an important moment. You could go way wrong and embarrass the student, which could escalate into a behavior issue, or more likely just discourage that student from ever participating in your class again. You could just be neutral and say something like, "No, not quite," and then move on. This could also be discouraging, but probably wouldn't be devastating. A third option would be to use the moment as an opportunity for critical thinking, for digging deeper into why the mistake was made so that the student, their classmates, and even you can get a better understanding of the underlying misconceptions that present themselves while learning your content. This is the kind of shift my guest, Colin Seale, wants to see us make in our classrooms. As a young student, Seale often found himself unsatisfied with and unmotivated by school until a teacher recognized his abilities and had him tested for the Gifted and Talented program. Inside that privileged space where his intellect was challenged and critical thinking was served up regularly, the difference was night and day, and he started to experience much greater academic success. After training as a math teacher and later when he attended law school, Seale's earlier experiences coalesced into a new mission. All students, not just those labeled as advanced, should be given regular practice in critical thinking. And it didn't have to be anything complicated. All teachers had to do was start implementing critical thinking practices into their everyday teaching. Since then, with his organization Think Law and through his book Thinking Like a Lawyer, Seale supports teachers in this implementation. His work is so exciting to me because these methods fold right into what you're already doing. It's not a whole new curriculum or a completely different way of teaching. To give you a taste for the kind of things Seale teaches, we're going to talk today about mistake analysis, a way of turning errors into opportunities for critical thinking. In our conversation, he will share 4 different ways to implement mistake analysis into your classroom. Before we get started, I would like to thank TGR EDU Explore for sponsoring this episode. The creators behind TGR EDU Explore believe that when educators are empowered, students are empowered. The series of professional learning modules is available to educators for free, thanks to Discovery Education and TGR Foundation, a Tiger Woods charity. TGR EDU Explore gives educators, particularly those from under-resourced communities, the strategies they need to support student success in school and beyond. The learning modules, training videos, and digital workshops cover a variety of topics related to STEM and college readiness. With easy, no-cost access on any device, TGR EDU Explore emphasizes real-world connections that can lead to engaging careers. To learn how to take your instructional skills to the next level, visit cultofpedagogy.com/TGR. Support also comes from Hapara. Google and Hapara are better together. The Hapara Instructional Management Suite streamlines Google's G Suite for Education to create a seamless teaching and learning experience for one-to-one classrooms, remote learning, and hybrid models. Teachers love it because it simplifies teaching workflows and helps students organize themselves for learning. It makes giving formative feedback quick and easy, automates and helps you track differentiation, keeps kids safe online, and gives them reminders to turn in their Google Classroom assignments. To find out more about how you can use Hapara at your school, visit hapara.com/cultofpedagogy. That's HAPARA.com/cultofpedagogy. Finally, if you're looking for some high-impact PD that won't take a lot of time, check out my mini course, 4 Laws of Learning and How to Obey Them. In education, new ideas, tools, and strategies are coming at you all the time. On top of that, changing circumstances force you to make adjustments to the way you normally do things. With all of this spinning around you, it can be hard to find a clear path. What you need is a compass, a set of principles you can return to again and again when you start to feel like you're losing your way. This mini course is that compass, a set of 4 laws for planning instruction that will produce the most powerful learning. In just about 2 hours, this short course teaches you the laws through videos, guided notes, and quick module quizzes to check your understanding. To learn more, visit cultivepedagogy.com/laws and use the code LISTENER at checkout to take $5 off the course tuition. That's cultivepedagogy.com/laws. Now here's my interview with Colin Seale about mistake analysis. I would like to welcome Colin Seale to the podcast. Hi, Colin.
Hey, Jen, so excited to be here.
I'm glad you're here too. I think you've got some really cool stuff to share. We are going to be talking today about mistake analysis, but before we get into that, let's just roll back a little bit and have you tell us a little bit about the work that you've done as an educator and what some of the stuff you've been doing more recently is.
All right, so I am a math teacher who taught in Washington, D.C., and I taught in Las Vegas. And when I was in Vegas, I actually went to law school at night at the same time, like a psycho. But what was really cool about that was I realized a lot of the same critical thinking we were learning in law school was exactly what our kids needed well before middle school. So why wait all the way until law school to do it? So for the last 6 years with Think Law, we've been really helping educators demystify critical thinking using curriculum that's based off of real life legal cases in upper grades and fairy tales and nursery rhymes in lower grades, but also really trying to help educators find that funk within their existing curriculum so that kids can be able to lead, innovate, and break the things that need to be broken as a way to accelerate the learning outcomes in your classrooms.
And so, yeah, let's talk about the actual book, Thinking Like a Lawyer. What is the message or the goal for that book?
So, Thinking Like a Lawyer was published after 3, 4 years of going all around the country, spreading this word that like critical thinking should not be a luxury good.
Mm,
When we start looking at who has access to these game changing things, we started to realize that brilliance is distributed equally, but opportunity is not. It played out in my life in a very personal way as a kid who grew up on free and reduced lunch, who grew up in a struggle, and ended up in a first grade classroom with all these behavior challenges. But it turned out my challenges came from a lack of being challenged. And when I fast forward to the experience of being an attorney, and I got this time where, like, the most brilliant young person I'm coming across is not a kid in my classroom, but a kid in juvenile detention. I'm
mm,
like, we are systemically leaving brilliance on the table. So, how
mm-hmm.
do we create constructs that are seamless, that are practical, so we can actually make this real? And in the framework of the conversation nationally that we're having around equity in education, one of the things I always push is how do we make equity real at the classroom level? Right? We could talk about implicit bias all day, but what about
Right.
the explicit bias of saying these kids can't?
Mm,
How do we tackle that? Well, these
mm-hmm.
kids can't often truly means I have no idea of, as an educator, of how to create learning conditions such that all kids can. So, in Thinking Like a Lawyer, we give you so many practical strategies to implement these low floor, high ceiling constructs that allows you to essentially hack our understanding of Bloom's taxonomy. So you don't have to actually think you only can get to those high levels every once in a while. But you can
Mm.
start with these high levels, evaluation, synthesis kinds of questions that spark our young people's will, drive that skill development to get those lower level aspects of Bloom's taxonomy. So just switch the way we think about things in a way that's super practical for the classroom.
Yeah. And so, okay, so let me see if I've got a clear understanding. Your work in law school, basically some of the practices that you were taught or that were exposed to you basically as a law student and as a lawyer, you started to realize we could be doing these things in schools in all classrooms and be giving our kids more exposure to critical thinking practices and just infuse those throughout the school day at all levels.
For sure.
Okay.
And it wasn't even just the exposure element. It was the idea that this was the natural way in which kids already existed in the world,
Mm, mm-hmm.
particularly kids that don't do well in the highly compliance driven, rules based format that school typically is given in. So, as a kid who was never student of the month, As a kid who like was never even line leader, and you got to understand, Jen, I was short. You got to go out of your way to not make the shortest kid in the class the line leader, right? Like it turned out I graduated top of my class in law school because all of those years of saying, well, what had happened was actually became a benefit. I saw angles. Growing up in poverty, watching my mother innovate by making $1 out of 15 cents,
Mm,
negotiate bill payments, negotiate how to not get evicted. These were all assets that I never had a chance to demonstrate before I got to law school. Our kids
right.
have those assets too.
Got it. Okay. And so what you're saying is that a lot of our kids who are in certain kinds of schools, under-resourced schools, or even in the classes where they haven't been identified as gifted, they are given a kind of education that just only values compliance, staying still, sort of regurgitating information and not letting those kids tap into the critical thinking skills that they already have that would actually light them up and get them really engaged. And that's what you offer in this, in your training and in your book.
Precisely,
Okay.
precisely. And the whole point of why we have a curriculum on top of that is to help educators develop the muscle memory on that how. Because it could be a pretty big transition to start
Yeah.
having kids do more heavy lifting in their learning. We got to
Right.
talk about that power. It's so easy to hang on to that power as an educator, and it can feel
Mm,
very scary to make that transition. So we spend so much time talking about how do we scaffold aspects of that transition so it
mm.
doesn't kind of go from 0 to 100, and you could feel much more comfortable as students start to actually show their power as a way to accelerate learning outcomes in the
Got
classroom.
it. So, really, what you and I are going to be doing today is only drilling down to one specific strategy, but you have so much else in the book and also in your professional development that you offer through Think Law. But I thought the most effective way for us to give teachers something that they could try right away would be to talk about one strategy and then let them know that there's so much more that you offer in your other stuff. So, we're going to
Sure.
talk about mistake analysis today. And so tell me just first, what is mistake analysis and why do you think it's an important thing to incorporate in the classroom?
So when I think about mistake analysis, I think about a whole era of like people feeling funk, people feeling like fear, people feeling so much anxiety when it comes to making a mistake. I think about the time that I was on a plane with a woman who ran the career services department for a top engineering school in the Southwest. And she
Mm-hmm.
told me that employers have made it clear to her in no uncertain terms, stop sending me 4.0 students. They
Mm.
are useless to us.
Oh my
And I
gosh.
thought about this world that what it means to be successful in our system is not translating to the kinds of things that people are looking for success outside the system, where mistakes are the norm, where failure is the point.
Yeah.
So, how do we create kids that are thinking about success beyond perfectionism, beyond this idea of just getting a single right answer? We've got to change the culture for mistakes altogether. And we can capture magic when it comes to these mistakes. If we can really get to the metacognition involved in mistakes, to the reasoning involved in like ranking and sorting the seriousness of mistakes, it brings them to that world that I was in as an attorney where you never really have a client that has totally clean hands, nor
Mm,
does the other side. So, how do I convince a judge that my client is more right, less liable? It's
mm.
all a matter of degree. But that matter of degree is where the conflict, the funk, the drama all comes in. So that's why this ends up being one of the most practical strategies for the thinking like a lawyer framework, right? We do investigations, we do competition, settlement negotiation, but mistake analysis ties so closely to the day-to-day aspect of being a teacher that I'm excited to be able to dig into that in more detail.
Okay, cool. And so you're sort of talking about neutralizing the stigma around mistakes. It seems like that's sort of a first step is to use some of these practices to get students a lot more comfortable with the idea of mistakes, is thinking of them as a natural part of the learning process as opposed to this scary thing that makes them stuck.
And I think about it both from a student perspective and from the teacher perspective as well.
Mm,
Because if
hmm.
we're being real, there's a reason that educators get like better insurance rates. We tend to follow the rules, which means our own relationship with mistakes is often very funky. I think about a
Mm.
time that I was in the classroom and I saw a teacher saying, like, you know what would be worse if you hit somebody with a stick because they wore a red shirt, or if you hit somebody with a stick because of their race? And all throughout the class, people were like, oh, the race would be much worse. That's racist. People can't control what race they're born into. But then one little girl said, you know what? The blue shirt would be worse. So the red shirt would be worse. And I'm like, well, what I loved about this teacher is she stayed with the funk. She was like, well, what would make you say that? I wasn't
Mm.
expecting that answer. Caught me off guard. And
Yeah.
she was like, well, we know that there's racist people in the world that do racist stuff and that's really bad. But if you're throwing sticks at people because they have on red, you might have much more serious issues in your life. And I thought, I'm so glad this teacher stuck with it. But if we're being honest, would you have stuck with that? Would that have
Yeah.
been
Yeah.
you? Like, or would you have been like, okay, come on, like, get out of here? Like, will we just dismiss it outright without recognizing that so often mistakes are originating from some place that I can work with?
Yeah.
Either
And
it's going to
there's,
give me insight into this child's thinking or give
right.
me insight into how I might want to make sure that they're learning this thing correctly. But none of it
Yeah.
should ever be dismissed.
Right, right. Okay, and so what you've got, and for people listening, Colin is actually also putting together a blog post that outlines these four strategies that we're going to be talking about, four different ways of incorporating mistake analysis into the classroom. So I'm going to have you sort of talk us through those now so that people listening can give that a try in their classrooms. So what is the first one?
So when you're planning, the
Hmm.
first one that I would recommend is to anticipate and plan for the good mistakes in
Hmm.
advance. You know how kids are going to mess up when they're adding fractions with unlike denominators. Right? You know that
Right.
common pattern, just adding the numerators and adding the denominators. You know that when kids are telling time, they might confuse the hour hands and the minutes hands. They might not really understand that, like, that five isn't really like a five, or you need to make sure that, like, you understand this, you've taught, you can predict, you can
Hmm.
make inferences, and if we plan for it, then we're ready for it when it comes. We can correct common misunderstandings along the way. We can even preview common misunderstandings after we cover something to
Mm.
get them to check you. I used to always end any class that I had about, like, angles in a circle with a statement that I asked my kids to correct and, like, find the error in. I had a friend in college who never read a book, was a clown, never did his work, and he made a complete 360. Now he's a completely different person. And the funny thing is, people say that all the time, right? The people made
Yeah.
a complete 360,
Right.
but kids were able to capture, no, that doesn't make sense. It has to be a 180.
Yeah.
360 means he's back to being the same person. Like, yeah. So that light bulb moment, when they get to
Hmm.
find a mistake that I already anticipated was a common one, starts to change attitudes towards mistakes.
Got it. Got it. You're just letting them know these are all possible ways that you might like get this a little bit off, especially at first when you're just starting to learn it. Okay. So anticipate those good mistakes. That would be the first strategy that teachers can kind of apply in their planning. What's number two?
It's really making sure that you use the strategy of probing questions so that you can grapple with good but unexpected mistakes in real time.
Okay.
How can we use probing questions to deal with the unexpected, wild things that students throw our way that we just don't see it coming at all? I remember being in a fourth grade class one time and they were doing long division. And it was this odd thing where they had these whiteboards up, and every time the whiteboards would go up, the kids that got it wrong, their answer was like huge. So you're dividing, but the answer is actually getting bigger. How is your quotient bigger than a number you started with?
Mm.
So what was going on there? The teacher had this whole thing where they were singing this song. First you must divide, then you multiply, then you subtract. But what she didn't realize was that in the class that had a lot of English language learners, first you must divide sounded like multiply. So you
Oh,
had kids that were singing, first you multiply, then you multiply. So it
oh
was
my God.
unexpected in real time. But we were able to
Yeah.
catch it in real time because it looked weird. It caught us off guard. So I'm able to be like, all right, can you sing that song again? And we can get down to the root of what's actually happening there. But
Right.
you can't just take an answer that seems really wild and presume that kids are coming out of left field with it and just giving you a blind guess. Sometimes they do, but oftentimes it's actually deeper than that. Oftentimes there's a reason that thinking is lending them this way. So can we stop and can we reteach? Can we stop and can we actually just ask a young person to explain their thinking when it comes to one of those mistakes in real time? Because you don't know when you might be missing magic.
Do you have any suggested phrases that teachers can use when they are asking? Because I think sometimes if a student gets something wrong and they realize it, there are a lot of ineffective ways to respond to get the student to explain it that would make them feel like they were being called stupid or put on the spot. Like, how would you phrase it if a student gave a wrong answer and you wanted to probe for more information? What would you say to them?
So a lot of times I'm like, that's interesting.
Mm-hmm.
What will make you say that?
Okay.
I want to validate thinking. I want to validate reasoning. I want to make sure that we respect the process. Oh my God, I was so annoying as a math teacher. That was my phrase every day. We just got to respect the process. Respect the process. Because you know what? Like when you start to see that, oh, okay, my algorithm fell apart on the third step, you're able to see that you are actually moving yourself along the journey through that first and second. And a lot of times, this is actually really, really important. We spend so much time as educators thinking about the questions we ask kids. One of the most powerful questions we can ask our young people instead of like, whoa, have you thought about that step? And have you noticed the sign of that one? Or have you really checked out how to sound out that word is what questions should you be asking yourself right now?
Hmm. Hmm.
Because it's one thing for our kids to be problem solvers, but if you want them to be problem finders, which is key to leadership, key to innovation, they've got to be able to generate their own questions. So to start with, I want to make sure when I do my algorithms, I'm setting them up as questions to begin with. But now when I start to figure out where I got lost in those questions, I'm giving you credit for it. If I did want to ask you questions about a mistake, going back to that question, I just would really ask them to explain their thinking and explain their reasoning, explain their process.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
If
And
this
that
was
is such
something
a
where it was
respectful
less,
question.
say it again.
I said that really is a respectful question,
Yeah,
especially if you're using the right tone of voice. If you sound curious and not mocking.
for sure. Because the
Yeah.
thing is, too, sometimes what happens is their reasoning is actually right.
Yeah.
Sometimes, especially if I'm outside of like a math class and I'm in a social studies class, I'm in an English class, the way they get to their conclusion could be very different. I was in college in an African American studies class about African politics, and I was asked, like, why is there no homelessness in Western traditional African society? And they picked on me. And my answer was infinity. And the class started laughing. And the professor lectured me. I got in trouble in college for being a class clown. And I really wasn't even making a joke. I wasn't making a joke. We had just learned about African fractals. And I was like, the base off of what we knew about infinity in Western traditional society, the land belonged to the current users, but also to the ancestors and also to the future. So this idea of property ownership didn't exist in the same way it did in
Mm,
Western views of like scarcity. They looked at it with a much more infinite background. But I didn't get a chance to explain why I said infinity. It was
right.
presumed that I was being the class clown, but there was a reason I said it. I just couldn't put it all together right in that moment.
Right, right,
So
right.
we're leaving brilliance on the table so often because we're so used to listening for one type of answer.
Yes. Yeah. And when I think about the body language of a child who gets an answer wrong and the teacher indicates that it's wrong and then that's it, I've seen so many times students physically shut down after that.
Yeah,
you
I've
know
seen
and
it.
and the idea that you could actually use that as a moment for further engagement and to get that student more interested in the question and turn it into a learning opportunity. I mean, just the culture of a classroom is so different with that kind of an approach versus just saying, no, sorry, that's wrong, let's move on to the next person.
And just think about the power dynamic once again. We've got educators that say these things all the time. Oh, I'm just a teacher. Do you understand you got the power to unlock magic, but you also have the power to crush young souls?
Mm,
So where do you want to be? Asking a kid to explain their thinking. You're acknowledging that they're thinkers. You're acknowledging that they are scholars who think through stuff. And that alone makes them feel more included in this space where learning is happening.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah, very
Yeah.
powerful questions for that. Are you ready for the next point?
Yes. Let's do the next one.
So, it might seem like a little bit weird at first, but allowing students to create their own good mistakes is actually a very powerful way to change attitudes around mistake analysis. So, like, you know this. You know what I'm talking about. Because if I tell
Mm.
you that I have a shirt that costs $20 and it's on sale for 5% off, and I'm asking you what's the final price, what would be the number one incorrect answer that a kid who's not paying attention, rushing through a problem, would tell you for a shirt that costs $20 and is on sale for 5% off, Jen?
They would just take $5 off, right?
And, and give you $15, right?
Yeah.
Because we know this. We know that there are a set of kids who are going to see a 20, see a 5, and
Yeah.
say, whatever. I'm going to either add them up and call it 25. I'm going to subtract them and call it, 15. I
Mm-hmm.
might even know a little bit about decimals and call that 0.05, subtract that from 20 and call it 1995. Here's the thing. If my kids start thinking in advance on that kind of higher level metacognition of how might someone get this wrong, what we're
Yeah.
doing is we're moving well beyond that low level area of like test taking skills. We're teaching kids how to think like a test maker. They're learning how to not just play the game, but how to slay the game.
Mm-hmm.
So in a world where so often the outcome is the equity, where our kids of color, our kids in poverty often have to work twice as hard to get half as far, this is a powerful tool for leveling up. And for me, I want to make clear of something. When kids fail the bar exam, right? When students fail the bar exam,
Mm.
there's the essay portion, there's multiple choice, and it's like a work practicum kind of place where you got to write these memos.
Okay.
Most people fail because of multiple choice.
Hmm.
They get tripped up in multiple choice. When you look at like the AP exam, the SATs, and even the tests that we have at our state levels, kids know the content in a lot of cases, but don't understand how they're being asked to answer this question. They fall for
Mm.
every trick answer every time. Do you
Yeah.
understand the power that comes with giving my kids the confidence to walk into these tests like, I've made these tests already. I already know how to do this. I
Yeah.
know what y'all trying to do, and I'm not going out like that.
Nice. Yeah. So that can be another practice, is actually having them anticipate what would be a really logical wrong answer here.
Exactly. But the caveat is you got to make sure you frame it when that construct that I call the Joe Schmo construct, right? Likely errors that will be made. Or else you get multiple choices like rainbows and unicorns and negative
Yes.
500 million. So you got to make sure that like they have to make it in the world of like mistakes you can actually justify and
Yes.
you can reason as to how somebody might be able to make this mistake by looking at this problem.
Got it. Got it. Okay. And so what's number 4?
Number 4 is one where we really bring the funk. We really bring the drama. And this one is which wrong is more right?
Mm.
Which wrong is more right? And I'm going to tell you something, Jen. I've got a lot of teachers with perfectionist tendencies who seriously get all up in their feelings when they see these kinds of problems, where I've got two equations, both done incorrectly.
Mm.
And you got to split up into different groups and think like a lawyer defending your side as to why you should get more credit than the other. Oftentimes we set it up so that one has an error conceptually, one has an error computationally. If I was doing this in a science framework and I had two experiments that were both flawed in terms of procedures, which one is more likely to have valid outcomes? Is it the one with the sample selection bias or the one with omitted variable bias? When I start looking at like sentences, when I start looking at like paragraphs with like capitalization errors and grammatical errors, like which paragraph should get a higher ranking from a scale of 1 to 4 or whatever, based off of the different kind of mistakes that are made. And when we're in this space,
Mm.
talk about throwing the fear of mistakes off the table. Talk about
Yeah.
bringing in drama and controversy, because at the end of the day, that problem, that question becomes your client. And our kids can be zealous advocates for their client. They are not going to give in for their client. And I'm going to admit to you that like when I first tried this strategy when I was teaching and going to law school at the same time, I was kind of hyping up the class a little bit, being a little bit extra with it. And I was kind of surprised because at one point, some pushing and shoving happened in the back of the classroom. And I was like, whoa, 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 this got way out of hand. But secretly, I was impressed. I'm like, kids were ready to go to blows because somebody was talking mess about his equation. I think I'm doing something right.
Yeah,
I
that's
believe I'm
fabulous.
doing something right.
That's the highest level of engagement you can ask for, right? Oh my goodness. Okay, these are such cool strategies, and I am now after because this is the first time you and I have actually talked. We've been
For
emailing
sure.
and messaging forever, but I'm now imagining what it must be like to sit in one of your trainings and how energizing it's got to be. And so, talk to me a little bit about what Think Law. So you Thinking Like a Lawyer is the book, but then the company itself is called Think Law, and you all offer professional trainings for teachers in how to do more of this critical thinking with students.
Yeah, yeah. What we do in a very practical way is like when we have our magic wand to work with school systems, we work with you within your existing curriculum. Because I don't believe you need to throw everything out. I
Mm,
also don't believe that like we can handle one more thing, right? So within your
yeah.
existing curriculum, we work with your content people, your lead teachers, your ELL, your gifted specialists, so we can modify your existing curriculum so that one lesson per unit goes there with these critical thinking frameworks that are culturally responsive and light our kids on fire. We also have our curriculum. We have parent workshops. We have a Think Law family experience product that goes straight to families so that they can have these conversations at home, where they can go more back and forth with their kids and nurture
Mm,
critical thinking. And with the Thinking Like a Lawyer book, teachers, educators, leaders, they have the ability through our book and our book study framework to actually dig in much deeper with these strategies. Look at all the examples we have around all these frameworks. So we work with schools across 40 states. I do like a lot of 3 hour, 6 hour PDs, a lot of opening like keynote speeches kind of deals for conferences and also for different like education kickoff for convocation. But really, we're just trying to demystify what critical thinking is so that it's no longer a luxury good reserved only for the most elite kids at the most elite schools. Critical thinking needs to be an aspect of what every kid is getting in their tier one instruction, especially right
mm,
now, Jen. We talk
mhm.
about COVID and learning loss and this whole conversation.
Yeah,
There's never been a better time to start talking about acceleration. How do we look at
yeah.
raising the bar? And you know what? We've got so many kids who have had such little joy in their learning before all this.
Mm.
Let's not give those same kids even less joy. We want to mandate something, let's mandate joy. And we could do that through critical thinking as our pathway to build these learning relationships.
That is a really good note for us to finish on. Tell me where people can go to find you online.
Sure. You can look at the Think Law website, www.thinklaw.us, and you can follow me at Colin E. Seale on Twitter or Think Law at ThinkLawUS. Any questions for me that you might have, you could also email me. I'm very responsive at colin@thinklaw.us.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I am so glad we finally made this happen. I think people listening to this are going to be super, super excited about this. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
To read Colin's blog post and find links to his book and website, visit cultofpedagogy.com, click podcast, and choose episode 168. And remember to check out my mini course, 4 Laws of Learning, at cultofpedagogy.com/laws. Use the code LISTENER at checkout to get $5 off tuition. Thanks so much for listening and have a great day.